It's going now.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Might just wait 1 second.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, when it starts, I got to mute it because it starts giving me feedback. Okay, we are ready to go. So thank you for joining, everyone, and thanks, Celeste, and hopefully Beth, if she can make it for the 2 presentations that will be shared today to our group, and we'll record this and share it with the wider team. So really excited to have Celeste with us, up bright and early from Paris, and she's going to talk on the GORN strategy meeting that was recently held in the lovely Amman, Jordan. Thanks, Celeste. Over to you.
Thank you. So thanks for this opportunity. It's really nice to be able to share experiences like this with you all, of course, importantly. So I went to a meeting in Jordan earlier not this month, May it was, to talk about the implementation of their strategy, which has just been completed. It's a 4-year strategy, 2022 to 2026, that's been published. Hang on, I'm trying to move my slide. It's not happening. There we go. Has been published and can be viewed. And this was a meeting to bring a whole bunch of partners together. I'll explain in a minute who those people were, to discuss practical ways to move forward and implement their new strategy. So it took place between the 8th and the 12th of May in Amman, Jordan. And just to remind everyone, GORN stands for the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network. I've dotted it with some photos because it can be a bit dry talking about a meeting that took place far away from everybody. So I've tried to make it just a little bit interesting. So where is Jordan again? I have been there before, but when I got there, I still had to look up a map. So it's wedged in between Israel, Syria to the north. It's surrounded by, I suppose, turmoil in a way. I think there's unrest all around it, but it's a bit of an oasis in the Middle East where it's nice and safe. And it's one of the safest countries in the Middle East, actually, and really beautiful. It's got Iraq to the east and Saudi to the south. And some of you might be aware that there's some very, very beautiful old carvings into the rock in Petra in Jordan, which was used as I think it's been used for many movies, but famously for the Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom movie. Okay. So GORN, what is it? Just to remind everybody, I think everybody on this call is probably aware of what GORN is, but it was established in 2000 by WHO post the H1N1 pandemic. It's a network of partners and other networks around the world, which sort of work together to respond to public health emergencies in member states around the world. There's an operational support team that sits in Geneva. It's not very big. I think all of them were there at this meeting. There's regional focal points. So they sit in the WHO regional offices in all of the regions around the world. There's 2 collaborating centres. Now, I didn't know this, so this is something I learnt. We're all probably familiar with WHO collaborating centres that specialise in certain areas, like laboratory or other things around the world. There's 2 that are dedicated to GORN. One's in Berlin and the other one's in Russia, but that one isn't really operating at the moment for obvious reasons. So partners across many different disciplines. They include us, the University of Newcastle, and FET PNG as of last year, I think. which is fantastic. It crosses all sorts of different institutes, including public health institutes around the world, medical, technical networks, UN organisations, NGOs, and other academic institutions. And in Wipro, we have 71 partners. So who was there? Lots of people. Met lots of people from around the world, and these are just some of the organisations that were represented. As I said, the makeup of the group consisted of partners, regional focal points. They were all there, and the steering committee members. I don't know how many there are, probably about 15, I'd say. Okay, so what were we there to do? We were there to help GORN to discuss a way forward in terms of the implementation of its recently published strategy. That's the link to the strategy if you're interested. But basically, the strategy crosses 4 themes, and this was the basis of our discussion. We sort of talked about activities and implementation around these themes. The first one is that GORN is community-centred. Second, that GORN is committed to a global public health workforce. The third is that GORN is creating solutions for a better response. And 4, GORN is a collaborative network of institutions. The strategy was made over a 9-month period with lots of consultation. And these were the sort of 4 pillars or themes that came out of that development. And we were there to discuss, to clarify what these themes sort of meant, and then look at where GORN sits in the current landscape of global emergency response, and in terms of all the other activities that are happening in the world at the moment. And to, again, as I said, look at tangible ways to operationalise the GORN strategy moving forward. We had to come up with activities that could be implemented that related to these themes in the short, medium and long term. Okay, so this is just very quickly what the meeting consisted of. Monday to Wednesday was the strategy implementation meeting, which involved talking in regional groups and other groups that they formed, small group discussions that crossed regions. It was a nice and interactive workshop. And then on Thursday, the steering committee met, and for the first time, they opened the room to the partners as well. So we were able to listen in and contribute in a limited capacity, but still we were able to contribute. But we're not allowed to talk about it. Apparently, they're putting out a report of what was discussed in that meeting that will go to focal points. So Tambra, you could look out for that. And then on Friday, it was closed to us, and just the steering committee met. Okay, so the first thing we did was get into our regional groups and just discuss in general, brainstorming out some of the potential opportunities or amplifiers for implementation of the strategy that we could identify in our region. Wipro was the biggest group, which was pretty interesting. I think that just shows the interest that there is in Australia and in our neighbouring countries. There's also a very active regional office focal point, Sharon, who we all know. Yeah, so that was quite a good, interactive, interesting discussion, a good opportunity to meet partners in the region. And we identified that, look, there's a lot going on already. I got an opportunity to explain to everyone what FEiA and FETP&G does in the region, which was great. So everyone was aware that we're sort of implementing at national and provincial level something similar to GORN training. We're trying to adapt the training in the form of RRT, and also explain to them about our FETP programs. We also thought that there was an opportunity to enhance the options for working together, and that could be done better in the region. That there was a lot going on, and perhaps we needed to discuss more between partners in the region about, and so that we are not duplicating, and that so that we were working better together. Some of the barriers identified was that training is very supply side driven at the moment. I mean, there's no shortage of need, but there is a shortage of supply, I suppose, and that just comes down to funding as well. There was talk of mapping our partner capacity, which has already been done to a degree by ANU recently, but there's a need to do that not as a one-off, but as a dynamic thing. So there was talk of creating some kind of platform. I don't know whether that's through GORN or separate, but where we are constantly or regularly updating our capacities and technical expertise from our institutions, so that we know where the gaps are in the region. Okay, so just let me know if I need to stop too in terms of time, or I need to hurry up, but I'm just going to briefly go through each of the themes and what we came up with in terms of potential activities. So the first theme was that GORN is community-centred, and everyone agreed that this was probably the most difficult concept to grasp in terms of what GORN does, which is typically send people in from usually well-equipped countries to member states who need support. So it's hard to understand how GORN can operate in a more community-centred way, given the mechanism currently. So there was a lot of discussion about what that actually means, and if a few people came up with, well, it's really not about our ability to do risk communications, but really just tapping into what the community needs when we go in and do outbreak response. Working in more participatory methods into what we do in terms of outbreak response. And somebody mentioned that, look, we really need a cultural shift in the way we do things, so that it's a norm to understand the community and what is needed there, and not and that is essential, and not just seen as an asset. So how can we do community-centered approach better? Well, there was talk of mentorship and how that should become more of a normal thing, where we pair international deployees with local deployees. And this is used more consistently. I think it has been trialled. And in this way, you get the sort of external expertise, but you also get the local knowledge in a response. There was talk of operational research was quite a common theme that's kind of cross-cutting across all of the different pillars, I suppose, of the strategy. And there was talk of bringing more operational research into the community engagement space. Oh, pardon. And then also it was raised that it should be important that deployees are a bit more aware. So this we should make sure that training has enough community engagement and risk communications material, and that people go in well equipped. Tier 2 was quite good, I thought, in terms of having a lot of risk comms incorporated. But if you haven't done that, then I think it's important that all GORN employees deployees have access to the resources that they need. And also, it's important that people have tap into local organisations, like community-based organisations, because often I don't think a deployee necessarily should play a huge role in that community engagement, because they're so far from the community and often go in for a very short period of time. So it's important to understand the lay of the land when you get into a country, and maybe engage with organisations that do know the community. There was talk of potentially including these organisations in the GORN network itself. Any questions so far, or shall I crack on? Nope. Okay, so the next theme was GORN is committed to the global public health workforce, and really a common recurring sort of discussion point under this was that we need to look towards, or GORN needs to look towards more regionalisation of their operations. So it's very global at the moment, looking at better coordination locally and deployment locally when there's an issue. And is there a role for GORN in multi-agency coordination? That popped up a few times as well. So activities in terms of this theme, like I said, more deployment locally was identified. It was really raised multiple times that it's not necessarily palatable nor practical to continue the fly-in, fly-out mechanism, and that we need to build local capacity. I don't think this is news to anybody, but it's good to hear that that's caught on.
Mary Celeste, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course.
I'm just thinking about how this plays out with GORN. I mean, this sort of comment is easy rhetoric and everybody says, yes, we need to do this. But given, you know, how does GORN have any influence of local deployments? I mean, that's Ministry of Health, you know, in country. So it's really outside of the scope and realm of GORN. Was there any discussion about GORN's role in supporting local deployment?
Well, I think what their thought was that they would tap into to GORN networks within the country and then coordinate with, because if there were networks within the country, and then pair them with potentially other partners outside of the country, but also working much more closely, I think, with ministries for that coordinated response. Rather than it just being a unilateral agreement.
Yeah, because just thinking about FET PNG as now a GORN partner. Well, if
yes,
they've got an outbreak in PNG, well, the NDOH is going to coordinate that and manage that. They're not. I can't imagine they'll be open to GORN coming in and managing the local deployment of people. So just wondering how the localization would actually play out.
Sure. Well, this is only for, obviously, GORN would get involved, obviously, when there's external help required. You know, I mean, in the background, though, the idea is that GORN can facilitate improving local capacity anyway. I don't know how that's practically going to work, except for we're an example of how that can work, in that we're tapped into the network. We then adapt program to national and provincial level, which we're doing in the form of RRT at the moment. But that's certainly not being done elsewhere. I think that was a bit unique. But they're very interested in that. So that's something that they're thinking of doing or trying to develop in the future. So they're really relying on partners to do it.
But more about maybe their roles more supporting that capacity building at local level for deployment, rather than actually coordinating deployments per se.
Yes. Sorry, I probably confused you by putting it in the coordination of multi-agency response in under regionalisation. That's two separate things. I think they were talking about looking at in a multi-country, multi-agency response in a certain context. They were talking about, would they play a role in coordinating all the external agencies? But whereas separately, they're talking about better local coordination within the GORN partners, I think, locally. So not necessarily coordinating a response within a country, but certainly looking at deploying from GORN network if there is within the local region, if there is a need to bring in externals. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so more south deployments rather than
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thanks for that.
But also crossing, making partnerships with deployment to have a local deployee, and I whether that comes from a GORN partner or from the elsewhere, I don't know, within the country, and a GORN expert that comes in from externally. I think that's a great idea, because that will build local capacity. It crosses cultural barriers. It's opportunity for learning lots of things. So that's, but I don't, yes, how practically that works, I don't know yet, but I think they have done it a couple of times. Okay, so also looking at scaling up their training in this, under this theme. So there's talk of tier 1.5, which is basically just about the logistics of deploying with GORN. There was talk of partners delivering that so that they don't have to fly all over the world and do it, so that could just be done by partners so that it could be scaled up. Tier 2 needs to be modernized. It's from 1990s. And also there's talk of making that a regional training, so adapting it to regions, although I know it's within regions it's very diverse, but yeah, there's talk of doing that. And now there's a tier 3.0, which is leadership training, which is going to be rolled out. I'm not sure if they've done one yet.
It's already started virtually through COVID, and they've got a face-to-face in September. Okay,
thanks. Okay, and then finally, this was also a cross-cutting theme, that, if they want to try and make the GORN methodology a little bit more transparent so that there's a sort of good practice everywhere, not only within for GORN, but also it could be shared with at national with national institutes, etc., if necessary, so that they have also some guidance that is, I suppose, I don't know if you'd call it standard, go on practice, because at the moment it's there and it's in tier 2 training, but it's not documented anywhere. And, people who go in and do an outbreak response are generally trained well enough to do outbreak response, but they can't articulate necessarily what is the GORN methodology. So there's talk of a document that articulates that. Okay, so in terms of the third theme, GORN is creating solutions for a better response. So this really points towards improving their M&E, which there's a gap there. I think there was talk about an M&E framework a couple of years ago, but it was never implemented. So that needs to be revitalized. They have a strong interest in a more operational research and putting efforts there now to inform a better response. They have a lot of data sitting there in the GORN knowledge platform. Everybody who writes a response report goes in there, but I don't think there's much review of all of those data to improve responses. There was talk of adapting the GORN approach and workforce to different contexts like humanitarian crises, where actually GORN doesn't necessarily go in until there's an outbreak, earthquakes, etc. So that was interesting. I was asking everybody, does GORN go in before there's an outbreak? And it doesn't seem that they are, but I think there's a gap often. So it's often when in these situations, I'm thinking that the earthquake in recently in Turkey and Syria, there was a real need to step up surveillance and look at surveillance systems that were potentially broken when they first went in, but there weren't EPIs readily on the scene because the first responders that go in to these situations don't necessarily have those expertise. So that was interesting and made potentially a space for Gawne to move into. Okay, what else? There was also talk of regularly reviewing partner capacities and creating an up-to-date deployment list just to make deployment much more smooth. The Red Cross was there and they talked about making a deployment list for an just in case situation where there's potential for an outbreak, and they sort of compile a list of people who could deploy even if there wasn't a call out, just to make deployment easier and smoother. And there's talk of also making disease specific deployment lists. And also integration of the One Health partners. It wasn't a strong theme, but there was quite a loud voice coming out of WOA there at the meeting, which was great. It was only one voice, but she did a good job. Okay, sorry, it's going on a little bit. Let me go a bit quicker. So the last theme was building a collaborative network of institutions, which it already is. I think this is really about strengthening partnerships. So there were some discussions about how to enhance the engagement with partners, and one was providing an orientation package. So Sharon showed us an orientation package that she'd put together and asked for feedback on that. So that the partners who sign on and the focal points have a real understanding of what their obligations are, I think, in terms of Gawne, and that there should be a requirement that the focal points regularly update the capacity of their institution. There was talk of also having national and regional level partner coordination and sharing sessions. So in Japan, they did that at national level. All the Gawne partners came together. It wasn't coordinated by Gawne, it was just coordinated by one of the Gawne partners within Japan. So they all came together to discuss what they all had to offer and how they could coordinate if there was a call out. So there was talk about doing that, replicating that in Australia, and ANU sort of mentioned they could potentially coordinate that. Another discussion about how we could better create or improve deployment mechanisms was to become deployment mechanism agnostic, which I thought was a great term, so I stole it. And that meant that we don't have to rely on the WHO mechanism, but perhaps we could, the network, the Gawne network could be tapped into by other organisations like UNICEF or MSF. And then finally, we shouldn't forget networks outside of Gawne that could be used to fill gaps. So once we've done this capacity mapping, if there are gaps potentially like in RCCE, then it would be good to look outside of Gawne and try and fill those gaps. Okay, so just to wrap up, the main cross-cutting themes that came out of this whole discussion was, firstly, what is Gawne? I think there was I sensed a bit of an identity crisis in the whole post-pandemic, time where everyone's scrambling for a bit of space, and there's lots of new organisations, global organisations, and emergency response groups popping up. So I think they'd sort of become a little comfortable in their position all of these years. So there's talk of just making processes and documentation a bit more formalised. Regionalisation was a theme that crossed most of the themes of the strategy. And there was talk about how do we actually do that? Does it come through the regional office, or is there another regional hub? There's talk of creating a WHO coordinating centre for Gorn in Singapore. There's an application from the University of Singapore, the National University of Singapore, NUS, to become a collaborating centre for Gorn. So there's a lot of discussion about what that actually means. Again, modernising and franchising of the training. Again, everyone was quite interested in what we'd done with RRT, and that it was possible to replicate that in other areas. Potentially, there's an opportunity for us to collaborate on regional training for Gorn, and then adapting that to national level or provincial level in various countries in the region. Again, documentation, so documenting the methodology, but I was suggesting that they also put together a book or just a reference guide for people when they get into the field to draw on resources, because you go in, really you have to rely on your own networks to find out how to do things in a quite high pressure situation. So I think they're going to run with that, produce something. And again, cross-cutting, better monitoring, evaluation, and operational research. Okay, so what does this mean for us, FEiA and FETPNG? There is potential for collaboration on the contextualisation and expansion of local level programs like RRT. That is really similar to what they're trying to teach in the Gorn training. There is definitely a lot of potential for collaboration on operational research projects. I've already mentioned to Tambry, Lena Moses is heading that up. So she's the contact person if we want to get in touch. And then I've made some connections with others working in RRT, specifically in Jordan, in the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean Public Health Network, and she does national RRT training around the region and can hook us in with the CDC network for RRT. And then otherwise, I think there's more. We've got to just watch out for if there's going to be any coordination going on of partners for local responses and other things, operational research in the region through existing Gorn networks. So just better and more communication. And that's it. Any questions or comments, suggestions?
Thanks, Celeste. That was really interesting. Was there any discussion on the Bill Gates Global Epidemic Response and Mobilization teams, and whether that's gone anywhere? And because it sounds like it's a very similar thing to what Gorn does already. Yeah.
Now, this is something separate, right, to the global GHEC, which is the Global Health Emergency Corps.
I'm not aware of that one. Celeste.
Yeah, this is germ. There's lots of them popping up now, unfortunately.
Yeah, they didn't talk about germ, which is interesting. I don't know why. They talked about this other thing, GHEC, which is the Global Health Emergency Corps. Now, that's come out of the Health Emergencies Program in Geneva. And what they're trying to do is tap into leadership at national and regional level for better coordinated response of emergencies more broadly. So Gorn is can slot into that, but Gorn's more outbreak response, and this is broader, this is bigger, this is health emergency response. So I'm not sure how germ fits in to that. It wasn't discussed while I was there, which is interesting. Yeah, but there was a lot of discussion about how Gorn fits in now with this new GHEC. And if they're tapping into the same partners, what do the partners do when they get a call out from multiple agencies? Who do they, GHEC or GORN, who do they send? And with what network? So there's I think there's going to be a lot of jostling for space in the next year. But certainly GHEC was brought up at the World Health Assembly. There was a side event, and we had a representative from GORN talking about how GORN might fit in with that. But I don't know about this other one. It must have come up because Bill and Melinda Gates hosted it, the World Health Assembly. So I would have thought that it would have come up there, but I don't know. Yeah.
It's interesting. I haven't heard of the GHEC one either, but it's like there's the outbreak. So go on, there's the slightly expanded health emergencies. And then there is a bit of a gap, as you mentioned, with just general emergency response. I know PAHO has a very strong emergency response network in their region, but I don't think an equivalent exists in the other regions of the world. So there's kind of those three layers, seems like full-blown emergency response, so all sectors, which is the PAHO model, and that includes health. And then there's this GHEC one, sounds like it's focused on health, and then there's GORN, which is focused on outbreaks. So interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's still very abstract, the GHEC thing. So, and it's very much like it's more of a network of leadership for coordinated response. So I'm not sure whether there would be a deployment mechanism similar to GORN or not. Yeah, it's
interesting because the PAHO one is a team. It's like a team across the whole region. They have joint trainings, and that team gets mobilized for emergencies overall. So you have all the different sectors as part of the trained team. So it's a bit like a GORN in that regards, that it's more focused on deployment and response rather than coordination.
Yeah, interesting.
I guess in our region, kind of OSMAC kind of takes a bit of that role. Yeah.
Very wide Australia.
Yeah.
Hey, Celeste, what's the guy in the blue gloves making?
Yeah, this really awesome thing, and I can't remember the name of, but he was gorgeous. He was like, yes, I'll show you how we do it. And he was just so good with his hands. So it's I think the closest thing I can think of is the Turkish, what's it called?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
With the feta and the spinach inside.
Yeah.
Oh,
I can see them, but I can't remember the name either now.
That's
a gut, isn't it?
Gut. Yeah. Gut.
Sorry, Pat, did you say something?
I was thinking of pie, but I think it's different. Gozleme, that's the one.
Gozleme. And so we said, is it gozleme? Is it no, it's something else. And it's, so we ate that, and then I went and took a photo of him. He was very good at it. Yeah.
And was there a festival? Why all the lanterns?
No, it's just normal.
Just how it looks normal.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. And then over on the left is a Roman ruin from, I can't remember, but it's in the site of the citadel, which sits on a hill in the city. Beautiful. I can't give you much more information. Can't remember.
That's all right.
Roman ruins. If you can go and you haven't been, it's just incredible culture-wise. Food was off the charts. Really great.
Just a quick one before we wrap up, Celeste, on the buddy system for mentoring. I think that's a fantastic idea. Would that be just like if someone is going into a particular country, budding up with someone within that country, or does it also include
Yeah.
Someone from country A pairing up with perhaps a more junior person from country B. So in our example, if we got deployed somewhere, taking someone from PNG or Solomons to go to a third country and using that as a opportunity to do mentoring of someone who perhaps hasn't done an international response before.
So there was definitely discussions for both. Yeah, absolutely. So both systems, both mechanisms were talked about. And even if for the second one that you mentioned, where someone goes to another country but is a junior or hasn't deployed before and perhaps would like some support, there was talk of a remote mentor as well. So if that person wasn't deploying with a more senior person, there was talk of just having some support remotely. They did that for one country in the Pacific, I think, where there was a remote person supporting to within the country.
I think
They
Singapore
told them
Singapore supported remotely
right.
some deployees during COVID, and it worked really well. So it was the first time they piloted that model, and it worked really well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think they're open to that now, whereas before they were fairly rigid in the way they did things. Like you were saying, Tambry, they deploy experts and that's it. But during COVID, they learned that the experts, the really experienced people, are busy with their own, if it's a pandemic, their own response. So, you know, more junior people were going. And they need that support. It also builds capacity in the region. Yeah. Yeah,
and well done from your side as well with the RRT training that's been run in PNG and getting some global attention over that training. That's very exciting.
It is exciting, yeah.
Yeah.
God.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well, we just did it because we felt that that's what is required. There was a need, wasn't there? But it's good to see that aligns well with exactly where GON wants to go, really. So they were quite excited to hear a sort of live example of how, their vision can be play out. Even though it's not such a small scale and in one little country in one part of the world, but, there is potential. I mean, there really is a recognition now that countries don't want foreigners flying in to help them. Sometimes they're just like, we can do this, and we all know that, they come in and sometimes are not familiar. It's a short period of time and it doesn't work. It's cultural differences, etc. So they know now. I think COVID's shown them they know they need to move from that model and still stay relevant. So, but how exactly that happens, it's still not very clear.
And so as you did there, was that the 2.0 training that you did in India and then modeled the competency-based training to some extent on that?
Some extent, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was the purpose to go to tier 2. I really, really benefited from doing that in developing the competency-based training, though it was different. It was quite adapted for PNG. It wasn't simulation as such, it was scenario based, but still was.
So that's phase 5 is the simulation.
Yeah.
I like the term they used of franchising their training. Are they seriously thinking of doing that, like developing a kit basically and then training a group of people to deliver that?
Yeah, I think that's the model. I mean, they can't there's such a small team and there's no thought of expansion of the team, I don't think. So it's about developing a package that's transferable. And then the idea is that the partners adapt it to national, provincial, or even a few countries that are similar within a region, similar language and, you know, culture. Yeah. So there, when I went to Geneva, I spoke to Sharon and Lisa about potentially, and Renee about if they were to develop a regional tier 2 for the Pacific, Western Pacific area, or even across into CIRO region, then we could adapt that for simulation training in other countries and not have to develop it ourselves. Yeah.
And they're definitely open for sharing and adapting and
Absolutely.
That's a great partnership.
Yeah, it's working well.
All right, it's nearly 5 our time and 9 your time, Celeste. So thanks very much. It was actually good to have you.
Sorry, it took the whole hour.
No, it's really a really good update, really interesting. And now we have another one with Beth for another time. So that's perfect. So thank you. And thanks everyone for joining, and we will record this and send it out.